Hi YouTube pilots, Marky Mark Tucson here to tell you about flying your small plane over the Grand Canyon. If you're passing through the northern Arizona area, it's a wonderful day trip. My goal with this video is to describe your route options, flight planning details, show you what you'll see, and also briefly describe the minimum aircraft performance you'll need to make this trip safely and enjoyably. So here I'm leaving my home field in southern Arizona in my little single-engine Cessna. Here's the special Grand Canyon VFR chart. There are 4 VFR overflight corridors in the park and a bunch of flight-free zones shown in purple. The keep-out zones go as high as 14,500 feet, so if you want to follow the river the entire way, you'll need to get up into the 15,000 to 17,000 foot range. These corridors are set up to mitigate flight noise in the busiest tourist areas of the park, so they take you over areas that you won't see from the tourist overlooks on the rim. Shooting these 4 corridors is a really great way to see parts of the park that you won't see from the ground. Here I've put the VFR flight corridors onto a topographic map so you can see how I've chosen to overfly the terrain on this flight. So here we go, northbound up the Zuni Point flight corridor. This was a morning flight filmed around 9 a.m. Zuni corridor runs roughly parallel to the river. The terrain elevation at the southern end of Zuni is about 7,500 feet. I'm going northbound, so my altitude options are 11,500 feet or 13,500 feet MSL to be in the published corridors. To keep the video short, I've sped it up to 4 times actual speed and quite a bit more in the transitions. This leg is about 20 miles long from rim to rim. Your passengers will have plenty of time to snap photos and enjoy the scenery. Sorry about the wobbly jello effect from my flight camera. Speeding up the video seems to make that a bit more noticeable. The flight cam is on the left side of the airplane, but my right seater had a great view of the confluence of the Colorado and the Little Colorado rivers here as we passed just east of Cape Solitude. As you set up for the Dragon Corridor, note that the terrain on the north end is about 9,100 feet in the Saddle Mountain Wilderness area. The published southbound corridor altitude would be a minimum of 10,500 feet, but as you're approaching the northern end of Dragon Corridor, that would have you flying quite a bit lower than the 2,000 feet above ground level required in the park. So for terrain clearance, I'd recommend the 12,500 foot altitude as a minimum for this leg. Dragon Corridor takes you directly across the canyon. It's only about 12 miles from rim to rim. The views are great on either side of the airplane here. Really, the viewing is going to be primarily driven by where the sun is in the sky. In midday, with no shadows, the terrain appears flatter and the colors wash out somewhat. In the early and late hours, you get these longer shadows that really highlight the topography. Of course, the trade-off is that these long shadows mask the inner gorge, so if you want to see the most of the river, aim for a midday overflight. So a little bit on climb performance. If you're unused to flying in the mid-teens, let me just say that you have to be very mindful of density altitude. At 14,500 feet on a hot summer day, it's entirely possible for the density altitude to be up in the high teens or even approaching 20,000 feet. Density altitude, of course, is going to dictate your aircraft's climb performance. You don't want to be right on the edge of your performance envelope in terms of altitude and climb capability, for the reason I'll now describe. Flying over the canyon edge is pretty much the inverse of flying over a ridgeline. As you fly past the edge of the plateau and over the gulch, your desire, of course, is to hold altitude, but the wind has no choice. It has to follow the terrain. As the surface wind crosses the rim, it's going to nosedive down into the ravine, so you can encounter a brief but pronounced downdraft as you transition the rim. On the other side, of course, you can expect the corresponding updraft, and no one ever complains about an updraft. But the downdraft on one side of the canyon can be quite strong. It's brief, you can fly through it, of course, just be ready for it. I once saw a 1,500 foot per minute descent rate for about a minute as I was transiting the rim. This is why I mentioned climb performance earlier. Your passengers won't like that sinking feeling, and you're not going to want to drop below the rim elevation anywhere in the park per the special flight rules, so you have to have plenty of climb performance margin left. I'm not saying that you need a turbocharged airplane to make this flight. Certainly you can do this safely in a normally aspirated airplane. All I'm saying is consider the density altitude, and you probably won't want to fill all your seats and all your fuel tanks in a low-powered trainer and then try this on a hot summer day where you might be at or above your service ceiling based on the density altitude and the load state. So just tell your friends to go on a diet, pay close attention to the winds and to your performance limitations, and you'll have a great time. You gain some terrain clearance as you reach the south rim in the Dragon Corridor. The plateau is around 6,600 feet elevation between Dragon and Fossil. There's a side canyon on the left, but it's not all that interesting. Your right seater gets all the good views for the moment. Here we're headed to Fossil Canyon Corridor. This is kind of a transition as the canyon gets wider and shallower downstream. Your right seater is looking back over the most rugged parts of the park, and your left seater sees what's coming up on Tuck-Up Corridor. The terrain rises to about 7,500 feet on the north side of Fossil Canyon. One thing I'll point out as I make this left and fly over the north part of the park, I fly over a little gem called Kanab Creek and its canyon system. Technically this is not part of the Special Flight Rules area, but it's still very rugged and beautiful terrain. If it wasn't right next to the Grand Canyon, Kanab Canyon would probably warrant being an attraction all of its own. So here I'll slow the video down so you can get a good look at Kanab Creek and its network of canyons. How about those colors? Tuck-Up Corridor is only 3 miles from rim to rim. It's the last narrow spot, as you can see on the topographic map. The inner and outer gorges converge here ever so briefly, and as you can see, at this point the outer gorge is getting shallower. As you look west towards Las Vegas, the outer gorge becomes indistinguishable from the Colorado Plateau itself as the Grand Canyon spreads out over the northwestern corner of Arizona towards Lake Mead. Okay, so that's what you'll see in the overflight corridors of the Central Grand Canyon. Of course, there is much more to the Grand Canyon National Park. There's Marble Canyon and the Vermilion Cliffs to the north, and the Western Park approaching Las Vegas and Lake Mead. It's an amazing sight, and flying over it in a small plane gives an intimate and unique perspective that you just cannot get on foot or on the rim, or for that matter from a jetliner when you're passing over it at 35,000 feet. This was about an hour of flight time as I zigzagged through the park. I've compressed it to about 10 minutes of YouTube time. If you want to visit the park on the ground, the Grand Canyon Airport is very nice. You can walk into the town of Tucson for a meal. In the summertime, there's a park shuttle that'll run you right to the visitor center on the rim. And in the off-season, the folks at the airport FBO can get you a cab ride by Xanterra, which is the park transportation contractor. Avgas isn't cheap at the Grand Canyon Airport. They're more focused on turboprop aerial tour operators. It's much more affordable at nearby Williams or Cottonwood. I should also mention Sedona while you're in the area. Sedona is the Grand Canyon just upside down. There's a nice restaurant right on the field and friendly folks. A half-hour walk on a fairly easy path accessible from the terminal gives this view of the red rocks of Sedona. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. I'll try to respond to comments if they're not too hateful. Happy flying to you.